Jesus said heaven and earth would pass at the fulfillment of the Sinai Covenant. Okay? Jesus said heaven and earth would pass at the fulfillment of the Sinai Covenant. And that is Matthew chapter 5 verses 17 and 18. As we go to our Bible, we're going to start with the King James Version. It says there, think not that this is Jesus speaking. He says, think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. Now, we're going to begin by pointing out some things which Christians miss. And I know from experience, because I am speaking about what was handed to me. Okay? And this is what generally when these two verses are looked at, the first thing that is emphasized is the law. And the law here is looked at as the Ten Commandments. But however, Jesus was, in the first place, when Jesus and the apostles use the word law, which Greek nomos, they are actually talking about the Torah, which is the writings or the revelation given to Moses from God, which Moses wrote in the book of the law. Okay, so this word law is short for book of the law. Also, it is referred to as Moses sometimes, when Jesus would say, did not Moses command you X, Y, and Z? Okay, sometimes it's called Moses, sometimes it's called the law of God, sometimes it's called the law of the Lord. But in any case, the thing that should tip us off of what Jesus was really talking about here is that he uses the law and the prophets. Okay, so that should clearly tip you off that he is not talking about the Ten Commandments, even if that is what your interpretation was, or even if that was what was told to you. You should look at the text and see, no, he's saying the law and the prophets. Even if he says, it's still the law and the prophets, he is talking about two things here, the law or the prophets, right? And when these two, the law and the prophets, are used in combination, it is the Torah and the Tanakh, right? Which means now the first 5 books, which are the writings of Moses and the writings of the prophets, like Elijah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Jonah, Micah, Malachi, right? Those are the prophets, right? So he is talking about the entirety of Scripture, right? And notice, he said he didn't come to destroy, but to fulfill. So he is talking about fulfilling the things written in Moses and written in the prophets. So Moses had things like, for example, the promises given in Genesis 3:15 about the crushing of the head. In Genesis 15 about Abraham's seed blessing the world, and he had promises hidden in the appointed times, like the Day of Atonement, the Day of Unleavened Bread, the wave sheaf, observance of the wave sheaf, the 7 weeks, the Feast of Weeks, the Passover. All of these things were prophecies given in type and in shadow, right? Which pointed to Jesus Christ. So in the law, in Moses, in the Torah, there were prophecies and promises. Also in the writings of the prophets, obviously there were a lot of promises because they were prophecies. So Jesus said, I am come to fulfill all of that. I am not come to destroy it. I'm not come to ignore it. I'm actually the fulfillment of these writings. Okay? So then he goes on to say in verse 18 that he gives in verse 18 now a time. He gives a cutoff point for when those things would be fulfilled. He said, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. So in other words, Christ, first of all, he says till. So this is a cutoff point, until heaven and earth pass. Okay? The jots and the tittles of the Torah, or in the writings of Moses, or in other words, the old or the Sinai Covenant, would remain. The jots and the tittles especially would be not just the prophecies now and the promises, but also Israel's obligations to keep the things written in the law, right? So he's saying, number one, Israel's obligations remain until heaven and earth pass. Okay? So that's number one. Israel's obligations, jots and tittles to the Torah, remain until heaven and earth pass. Also, prophecies would be fulfilled before the old heaven and earth passes, because he's not saying that one jot or one tittle will never pass from the law at all. He's saying it will never pass till it's fulfilled. And when it's fulfilled, then the heaven and earth will pass. Okay? Jesus has put these time limits in place. Okay? So that we would know now that once we see that the Sinai Covenant passes, well, then we should know that the heaven and earth has also passed. And we should also know that all the prophecies written and promises given have also been fulfilled, right? That's because he tied all of them together. You cannot separate them, right? You cannot separate the passing of the old covenant, or Moses and the prophets, or the Torah and the Tanakh. You cannot separate the passing of that from the passing of the heaven and the earth. They are all linked together. Okay? So when the heaven and earth pass, the jots and tittles pass. And when the jots and tittles pass, that means that all the prophecies have been fulfilled. Okay? That's how it is. You cannot separate it. Good? So, if we are saying that the Sinai Covenant has passed, we are actually saying then that heaven and earth has already passed. And we are also saying that all the promises and prophecies written therein have also passed. Because look at Matthew 24:34. Because even if we want to say, well, okay, maybe heaven and earth has not passed yet, and maybe all the prophecies have not been fulfilled yet, look at what Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 34. Okay? Matthew 24, verse 34. Look at what Jesus says. Verily, I say unto you, this generation, and so again, Jesus is being specific. He's not saying that generation or a generation to come. He's saying this generation which presently existed at the time he was speaking. He said, this generation shall not pass till all these things be fulfilled, which means the things written in the law and the prophets must be fulfilled before the generation to whom he was speaking passed. So in other words, all prophecies were to be fulfilled in the generation of the people to whom Jesus was speaking to. Before that generation went off the scene, all the prophecies written in the Torah and the Tanakh, in the law and the prophets, must have been fulfilled. You cannot have it any other way. All right? Look at what Jesus said. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but his words will not pass away. In other words, this will not fail. Heaven and earth will pass away, but his word, his promise will not fail. So we can't turn around and say, well, maybe he didn't get everything fulfilled, so he left some things over for us in our time. No, Jesus says, my word can't pass away. Okay? My word shall not pass away. In other words, he's saying, you can't take my word and twist it. You can't make it mean something else. What I have said, and it stands. Okay? All these things, all things written in the law and the prophets, would be fulfilled in the generation to which Jesus was speaking. Good? Now, that is the context and that is the frame that we are going to look at what the apostles now said about the heavens and the earth. Okay? The issue of the new heaven and the earth is very simple. In the mind of the Hebrew, the heaven and the earth was the covenant relationship between God and man, between heaven and earth. Thus, the new heaven and earth is the new covenant relationship between heaven and earth. Now, excuse me, let me just help us out here. In the Hebrew mind, God created heaven and earth, right? In the beginning, Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, okay? God created everything. He created the whole earth, the planet, everything. But within that creation, God now established covenant worlds. For example, this is very easy to see. God created all, but then out of all, he chose Israel. And he established his covenant with Israel. So he actually established a world there, an Israelite world. So that is how they understood the covenantal world. Okay? So that covenantal world, the heaven and the earth, was the relationship between God and Israel. God being represented heaven, Israel representing earth. Right? As a matter of fact, in the book of Daniel, where they have the clay in the feet of the image, the clay was Israel, because they represented earth, because Adam came from the earth. Okay? So that was how the Hebrew mind, when they heard the phrase heaven and earth, just like when the Hebrew heard the term Torah, they didn't think 10 commandments. They heard Moses' writings from Genesis to Deuteronomy, right? That's what they heard. Okay? It's only we today, coming from a Western culture, heavily influenced by Roman Catholicism, right? When we hear the word law, we think we have been told it means 10 commandments. But if you are a diligent student of the word, and if you are not hampered by the King James Version, because you would not be able to see in the King James Version the real translation of what it should be. Okay? When the Jesus and the apostles used the word law, they always meant Moses's teachings. As a matter of fact, the word Torah means teaching. So the law of God really is Moses' teaching concerning God. Okay?